The Church in Wales has agreed a new Ministerial Development Review Scheme, or MDR for short, a scheme that's designed to operate across all dioceses in the Church in Wales. We all know that ministry, particularly parochial or church-based ministry, can feel relentless at times. And in such a busy context, it's hard sometimes to create the time and space that we should, just to stop occasionally, to reflect on the vision and passion which first brought us to our point of ordination. Space to think meaningfully on our current practice and well-being. Space to try and discern what God might be saying to us about the way forward. The Church in Wales bears a responsibility for the pastoral care and professional development of its ministers, whilst ministers themselves are responsible to God for the ministry entrusted to them, and to the Church and to one another for the way in which that ministry is exercised. So to that end, the new MDR scheme has a number of primary aims and objectives, these being to encourage an ongoing process of reflection and learning based on affirmation and accountability, to encourage a culture of lifelong learning and ministerial development, to encourage reflection on ministerial practice, and to encourage the setting of challenging yet achievable objectives. Fundamental to the new MDR scheme is a guided discussion which you as potential reviewers will be asked to facilitate between the minister and yourselves, a meeting which we hope will give the minister new insight and understanding, and will have a positive and constructive impact which better enables them to undertake the challenges and opportunities which will lie ahead. The Church in Wales is made up of 6 very distinct dioceses, each with its own identity, vision and strategy. And within each diocese lies a variety of different cultural and sociological contexts in which ministers operate. But at the heart of the MDR scheme lies the ordinal, the touchstone for all ministers, irrespective of where they are exercising or for how long. In drawing up the scheme, there were a number of key principles that we worked to. It needed to be episcopally centred, electronically based to keep the whole process streamlined, and to be easily administered. It also needed to be Catholic, with a set of questions common to ministers right across the Church in Wales, but at the same time contextual, with provision for individual dioceses to set their own questions dependent on their own context. The questions asked on the MDR form are intended to open up conversations which can provide both challenge and support. And those questions fall under 6 distinct headings. The first 5 are common right across the Church in Wales. So there are questions about a minister's prayer life, their engagement with scripture, study and learning, questions about welfare and well-being, about safeguarding, and about vocation in the church. The 6th and final set of questions are those set by the individual diocese, and they come under the heading of ministry in the church. Under this heading, there is scope for questions to focus far more on teamwork, on collaborative working, and the diocese's own context, vision, and strategy. I mentioned earlier that fundamental to the MDR scheme lies a guided discussion between the minister and you as their appointed reviewer. The review meeting provides an important opportunity for ministers to share their reflections, their insights and their hopes with a representative of their diocese who carries a responsibility for their well-being and their growth in ministry. That conversation seeks to enable reflection on the last year or so, presenting an opportunity to celebrate and give thanks for all that has been good. But equally, it also provides space to acknowledge what perhaps has not gone so well and to identify where additional guidance and support may be required. So how does the process work? It's worth saying at the outset that it's up to individual dioceses to form their own pool of reviewers. And this may differ from diocese to diocese. It's also up to each diocese to allocate a reviewer to each individual minister who is the subject of the review. Once that's done, then the reviewer and the minister can agree a date for that review process to begin. There's a specific MDR review form which provides the framework for the process, and the date agreed for the review meeting must be recorded on that form. Ideally then, that MDR form should be sent on to the minister at least 1 month before the review meeting is due to take place. This is to enable them sufficient time to reflect upon the questions grouped under those 6 headings that I mentioned a few moments ago. The minister is then encouraged to write notes alongside each and to forward that on to you as their reviewer in preparation for that conversation. They should do that no less than 10 days before the date that you're due to meet. This is to allow you time to prayerfully reflect on what they've put. In the meeting itself, you should use the minister's notes as a framework for discussion. And as a guide, that meeting should last approximately 1.5 to 2 hours. You and the minister will then need to agree a brief summary of the discussion under those various headings. And there's a separate section of the form set aside for that. You won't need to record everything that you've discussed, but nevertheless it should be an accurate record of your conversation. Any specific goals or objectives that you agree should also be noted, and ideally you should both sign and date the form before the meeting is brought to an end, and that can be done electronically. A copy of the completed review form should be provided to the minister at the time the meeting takes place, or failing that, within a week. And again, that should be done electronically, so an email is ideal, unless the minister specifically requests a paper copy. At the end of the process, you'll need to forward a copy of what you and the minister have written and agreed to the bishop's office, and it will then be placed on the minister's personal file. So as you see, as reviewers, you play a pivotal role in ensuring that the MDR scheme achieves its aims and objectives. There's a dedicated section on the St. Padans website about MDR, which includes a more detailed step-by-step guide to that process. So as you see, as reviewers who play a pivotal role in ensuring that the MDR scheme meets its aims and objectives. There's a dedicated section on the St. Padans website about MDR, which provides a more detailed step-by-step guide to the process. And you will also find on there a suite of 7 short videos. Each is just a few minutes long, but they're all designed to offer practical support and advice to help you in your role as reviewers. Those short videos cover subjects such as how to co-create a great review, what makes for a great question, how do you keep the diocese and the kingdom in the room, what happens when a pastoral issue arises, how to listen differently and challenge effectively, and how to agree future goals and intentions, especially perhaps when some might be averse to the language of setting ministerial objectives. Finally, thank you for agreeing to take on this role. Your positive engagement will play a crucial role in the success of the new MDR scheme. I've invited 3D Coaching to be part of this journey with us, our training for reviewers. And the reason that we particularly asked 3D is because I know that you have a heart for the kingdom of God and you have a heart for equipping the church. So there's an interface, isn't there, between the professional world of doing things properly and ministry, which can be haphazard at best. So where do you find that interchange? What gets you out of bed in the morning to engage with people like us?
Well, our purpose as a business is to bring the kingdom of God at work. So actually, as much as we love working in other organisations, we also really love working in the church, because there's something about equipping the saints for works of good service. And actually, my professional background before I started 3D coaching was in vocational discernment and selection of mission partners. So I was in the church and of the church. Well, I have been really my whole career, actually.
So you have a real invested interest in the church being the best it can possibly be as it engages with the world around us. Yes, that's a vocation of its own, Claire, surely.
Yes. Oh, I believe this is my calling. Absolutely, for sure. And so do my colleagues think it's theirs. And you know, it's, yeah, we're all called, aren't we? And some of us are called to stipendiary full-time ministry, and some of us are called to something else. And this absolutely, and in fact, I did actually explore a call to full-time stipendiary ministry briefly a long time ago. But what I recognized was that I don't do evenings very well. But also, I think one of the lovely questions that John Adair talks about in his book, Discovering Your Vocation, is that often our calling is the thing that fewer people can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And equipping clergy is a thing. So that's why we do what we do.
Brilliant. Absolutely delighted to have you with us on this.
Thank you. Later on in this video, we're going to be hearing from the bishop about what they think this is for, but I'm really interested that nationally, what's your take on what good MDR can do?
Well, I was a vicar myself for 19 years, and it's very isolated as a minister sometimes, well, frequently. Sometimes it's just good to have a check and balance. When I was ordained, I made some pretty chunky promises. And in the hustle and bustle of ministry, in the busyness of ministry, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that. So for me, first of all, I wanted a mechanism which asked me those questions again, where I could revisit those promises and remake that commitment. But equally, in making those promises, I was saying to the church that I would fulfill those duties to the very best of my ability. So there's accountability there as well. So for me, it's about support and challenge. And it's important that whether I'm ministering in Abergele or Aberystwyth or Abergavenny or Cardiff, we work for the same church in Wales and we work for the same God. So I wanted a system where we were all asked those questions so that we could all reflect on them regularly and just remember why we're in this. So strong challenge and strong support is what it's about for me.
That's about grace and truth, isn't it?
Absolutely. And sometimes truth is uncomfortable. Yeah. As ministers, we rarely take the time to deliberately just stop and to reflect on things and just to take the pulse of how things are. Grace we're very comfortable with, but truth comes into it as well.
Yeah. And in one of the other videos, we'll be talking about how to say what you see without judgment, which is such a gift for you as reviewers to be able to offer to a minister. It's funny.
Yep, sorry, go.
It's funny because as you talk, it feels like a kind of checking in. It feels like that ministerial review is that you're set off on you're ordained and you're set off on your lifetime of service. And actually what's really important is to take stock and say, so where are we now?
Absolutely.
What's happened and what else needs to happen?
Absolutely. And as ministers, as I said, ministry is relentless. It can feel relentless at times. So unless you build in, unless you're incredibly disciplined and you do that as part of your regular practice, then sometimes you can just get overwhelmed and you need to stop. You need to stop and just to reflect, to remind yourself why you're in it, because that's so important. Any job with people, you need to remind yourself why you're in it. But that stopping and just having somebody come alongside, as we hope these, as reviewers, that you will do that, to just come alongside people and be part of that process, be enablers really to allow ministers to do that.
So it's about ministers checking in with somebody else, with a fellow traveller, really.
Absolutely. And that's why we wanted to do this training for reviewers, so that everybody understood that that's exactly what we're doing. We're
Brilliant.
alongside, we're helping people, enabling people just take the time that they need to stop, to reflect, to take the pulse, to remember why we're in it, but also to help us to look forward to see what the journey might look like in the coming 12 months as well.
Brilliant. And actually that can usefully be modelled in the actual conversation about checking in, where are we and what else do we need to do? Because actually it's a co-created conversation and it's not your responsibility to make it work as the reviewer. It's actually your responsibility to do the stuff together, which takes the pressure off you. And there'll be more about that in some of the other videos. That checking in is your friend in ministry, and checking in is your friend in the time that you have for this review.
Absolutely. And to be honest, Claire, that's why I'm quite excited about this, because it puts that mechanism in place. That checking in happens. And as I said, as reviewers, it's a privileged position really to be an enabler of that.
Yeah. Can I be a bit controversial?
You can.
So my experience of working around England and Wales in churches around MDR is that there's a myth or a kind of story that says that MDR isn't always the best it could be. And what I observe when people are telling negative stories about it is that your lovely minister comes along and they fill out all their paperwork. They write it all down, they send it off to, and that's like a book. They send it off to their reviewer, then they have their review. And the review is like the film of the book. So it's like they replay what they wrote, and now they've got the film of the book. And then the reviewer traditionally has often written it up, which is the review of the film of the book. And that actually it becomes a kind of triple level duplication thing. So my question to you, Chris, is what do you see as its huge, marvelous potential in terms of partnership in the gospel that will make it not the book, the film, and the review?
Well, for me, it needs to be an honest engagement there, and there needs to be a willingness almost to be vulnerable, and that's difficult. So the reflective part of MDR, where questions will be given to the ministers, we really want people to reflect on those and to pray on those, to make notes about those, but to be honest, so that we're not just writing a narrative that we think somebody wants to read. It's a snapshot of where we are in ministry at that particular time. The review meeting itself is critical, because what we want you as reviewers to do is to see behind that narrative in many ways. So not just to regurgitate back to the person being reviewed what they've written, because nothing is gained from that. The skill is unpicking that, looking for the hooks, looking for the hints, seeing what's behind it, and engage in that conversation, and just having an open and honest conversation. And at the end of it, that should feel like a safe space. That's really important. A safe space, both for reviewer and for reviewee. And at the end of that, to pick out of that the honest bits, the bits really that we want to record. And there's a conversation that happens around that. So you'll have opportunity to agree on what's actually written down. We want that to be an honest appraisal of where somebody's at. We can't offer that support where it's needed if somebody isn't going to be vulnerable. So we're hoping it's a slightly different narrative that comes out of that summary, but also then to use that as a springboard to look forward. So again, you need that honest conversation to be able to say, well, you know, I can't do X, Y, and Z because actually E and C are still unresolved with me. So we want to end up with what is an accurate reflection of where somebody is, so that that support and that accountability can both be effective.
And the good news, reviewers, is that's about partnership, and you won't know how to make it work for another minister unless you ask them. And in some of the short video clips, we'll be giving you some tiny things that you can do to make sure that the conversation is in partnership. I love, Chris, T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, because I think they speak so deeply about the quality of amazing conversations. And in Little Gidding, he says, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And that's my hope in your reviews, that your minister, the minister you're working with, doesn't cease from exploration, and at the end of their exploring, at the end of that conversation, they leave the room knowing things for the first time with new insights and having felt really heard.
Absolutely. And as I said, the role of the reviewer there is to be skilled in that conversation. Conversations could be transformative. Conversations can be liberating. Conversations can be a little scary sometimes as well. But every conversation is unique. So as a reviewer, you may have 1, 2, may have many people to review in this process, but every single one of those conversations is unique. And the skill is being at the heart of each of those in a meaningful way to enable the minister, the reviewee, actually be able to articulate where they're really at and not just hide behind the narrative.
Transformational. I love that word.
I love that word. Kingdom of God is all about transformation, isn't it?
Yeah, be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
But it's an uncomfortable process sometimes, isn't it? You know, we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But to be of value, what we don't want, Claire, is for people to just see this as another job to be done, something else that's cluttering up the in tray. Oh my gosh, I need to put 5 minutes aside because I need to get this back to the reviewer. I'll just jot something down on the back of a matchbox and send that off. For the reviewer to just see this as something they could do without in their week as well. You know, oh my gosh, I need to find a couple of hours to do this, to be looking through it last minute and just sitting down and just having a meaningless conversation, just engaging with the process, really. That's not what it's about. At the end of the day, we want those conversations to be meaningful and transformative because we're in the transforming business.
I've just had an insight. New learning is always good, isn't it? But there's something about, we can't teach you how to have transformational conversations, but transformational reviews are the things that really change the world, and they change lives, they change communities. And in the videos, what we're going to do is to talk about some of the things that you can stop doing that stop transformation happening, because often it's just about to happen and we do something that just stops it in that final second. So I've just written down, stop, look, listen. But more of that in the video. That's my insight. More of that in the subsequent videos.
And it's a skill, isn't it? It's a skill and it's a discipline.
Yeah, totally.
You don't want reviewers telling their story and putting them out there. We want them to be listening.
Yeah. Can I just tell you, T.S. Eliot, I really am a little obsessed. In one of his other poems, which I think is Burnt Norton, but it's also in the 4 quartets, he gives the best definition of MDR I have ever heard. And he says this: you are not here to verify, instruct yourself, inform curiosity, or carry report. You are here to kneel where prayer has been valid.
Oh, love that. Love that.
And that's your task as a reviewer.
It's, yeah, and it's what a privilege to be involved in that process, Claire. You know, we want is for this to be seen as a burden. It's a privilege to be able to come alongside somebody and to have those conversations, to offer that challenge and that support. That's a privilege.
Amazing. So there'll be plenty more learning in the videos. They're going to be very short and just give you a little tip that will just slightly tweak the way you have conversations, really in service of transformation emerging more often, so that at the end of your review, the minister feels heard, and also that they've had new insights into their own stuff that will move with them into their ministry in the future. And one heads up, if you don't like the language of objectives, that's absolutely fine, because we don't need to talk about objectives, but we do need to talk about learning, and more of that in one of the other videos. So see you later.
Chris and I were talking there about transformation and being transformed by the renewing of our minds. What an extraordinary thing that is. And I guess the real question is, how do we enable transformation to happen in a review conversation? Well, it's really interesting because actually I'm a coach, as Chris said in the introduction, and my job is to enable people to have more transformational conversations, really to do two things when they are in dialogue with others. Number one is that the person that they're talking to feels heard. And the second one is that that individual has new insights into their own stuff. And that's the reason that I'm sharing some of this simple stuff with you now on these videos, because it can make a significant difference. So I want to talk a little bit more about transformation, but actually the kind of short answer is I can't teach you how to make sure that your review conversations are transformational. And yet, I can offer you a few little things that you can do slightly differently that mean that transformation is less likely to stop in its tracks. And actually that is going to make it more likely that the place in the review that you're standing is holy ground. So in science, if you want transformation to happen, and you may have heard this before, but if you want transformation to happen in science, you put stuff in a container, you apply a catalyst, and it's changed. One day I was teaching that to a group of people, and a science teacher said, unless it's a reversible reaction. And to be quite honest, the transformation that we'd like to happen as ministers review their vocational journey, we would like to be permanent and irreversible and deeply life-changing, or mildly life-changing, or a tiny bit life-changing. So baking is probably a better example of transformation. So in baking, if you want to make a cake, you take a whole load of ingredients, you pop them in a container, you mix them all together, you apply heat in the oven, and the thing that comes out of the oven is unreversible. It is a new thing, and you can't unmake a cake. So one of the things that we want to encourage you to do as you have your review conversations is, interestingly, to put boundaries or to put a container around the conversation, which goes very counter to what you've learnt in pastoral care and much of ministry, which is that open questions and open-sided conversations are really useful. My dad worked in religious broadcasting when I was a child, and he had a thing on the wall in his office, and it said, "The banks of the Yangtze give it depth, drive, and direction." And if you want to have a review conversation with somebody that has depth, drive, and direction, you will need together to put some banks around it, because you can't cover everything. And actually it's the banks that lead to the transformation. So my hope is for you that in every conversation, the minister that you are talking to and listening to feels heard and gets those new insights into their own situation and their own vocational journey. And that's it, really. So my encouragement to you is there are going to be a whole series of videos here. Each of them is very short. Please watch them all. And then when you've done a review conversation, if you think there's something that maybe you in your own reflection could have done a little bit differently, then return to the video where you know that that might be covered, and just have another look and see if there's one thing that you can do differently in your next review conversation, which of course mirrors the thing that we're talking about with ministers, which is what's the one thing that they can do differently that will make a difference in their ministry. So hope you enjoy the videos. And the first point really that I just want to leave with you is that transformation happens in a container, and more of that later. In the church, I think ministerial review is slightly tricky, because data is brought to the conversation in paperwork and in what the minister says. But it's not the same as review in almost any other kind of organisation. If you are reviewing somebody and you work in Tesco's, then what happens is you see them at work, you watch them engaging in all kinds of different things, so when it comes to the review conversation, you're actually able to make good, wise, observable data based on what you saw. In church, we use data in a completely different way. So the MDR forms that the minister fills in, which you will have seen, are self-reported data. It's what they observe about themselves. And actually, as much as we might be cynical and go, well, people will over-report, normally they under-report. So they miss a whole lot of things that are really important and significant in their vocational journey, because they just don't see them to get them in that paperwork. And often that leaves people with a bit of a lack of confidence. The other thing I think that's really interesting in the church is that if you're in a senior staff position, for example, when you go into a parish or a ministry area and you see people doing what they normally do, they're not. They're not doing what they normally do because you're there. And because you're there, you're doing some of it. So I think what I want to say to you is we need to be careful about data. And one of the things I think that really makes a difference in the stance that we take in review is moving it from a conversation where they talk to you, and it kind of goes to those things that were in that T.S. Eliot poem, that we're not here to verify, instruct, inform curiosity or carry report. We're here to kneel where prayer has been valid. So a review kind of position, a feeling, the way we are with somebody needs to be a being with place rather than a talking to place. And if at all possible, your role as the reviewer is to enable them or to facilitate them to look at things in a slightly different way. So on the subject of data, let me just offer something that might be useful. So the minister comes along and they've got all this stuff that's gone on. So some of that is hidden, some of it is stuff they know, some of it is stuff they're conscious about, some of it's brilliant, some of it's not so great. They come along with that stuff. If you get them to tell you everything, well, number one, they won't tell you everything, but what happens is they give you their data and some of it drops on the floor. Now you know an awful lot about them that they didn't know before, but they've had no new insight. So part of the reason for these videos is to help you to say, what is it that I need to do in order to facilitate, enable us to look together at the vocational journey and ministry of this individual so that they get new insights and have a new understanding of stuff. Because great review is a partnership. And when it's a partnership, it's more life-giving, it's more transformational, and it's going to make a more significant difference to the minister, to their area or team, to their community, to the church in Wales, and most significantly, to the kingdom of God. So it's partnership. If you do all the work, why would they? It's a dance. It's not a date. And one of the things I think happens in review conversations and other one-to-ones is that the person who is perceived to have more power, which in a review conversation, you may perceive yourself to have less power, but they will probably perceive you to have more power than they do. Often the person with the perceived power feels they need to work harder. But if you do too much work, they won't do any. So really getting that balance right matters a lot. And do you know something? You're not going to know if that's working or not. You're not going to know as you go through the review conversation whether it's useful and whether it's serving them or not. And that's okay and that's normal. And all you need to do is to ask them. It's their story. You're just with them on a part of that journey to look together at what's happening in their world. That's all. So in partnership, we just ask, how are we doing? Is this useful? Do we need to do something differently? And I would say, keep checking in all the way through the conversation. Simple. Simple isn't easy. Ask them.
So Bishop Cherry, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me this afternoon about MDR. So what is your best example of where MDR has facilitated your ministry?
Well, I have to say that most of my experience of MDR it's been very positive, but it's not actually been the kind of MDR that's actually helped me grow and develop. It's been very affirmative and very supportive, but not actually given me any real direction. That changed really in the last few years that I was in Manchester. And that was partly because we did some work on MDR as a staff team. And I think the best example I could give was a time when I was talking to the bishop, and it was Bishop David, about feeling too inward focused, because the work of an archdeacon can tend to be very focused in on the church. And I was wanting to start to look at ways in which I could be more engaged in the community and in life outside the church, and learn something from the secular world. And he was very encouraging of that, and actually helped me to get on the board of a housing association based in Liverpool. And that was really rewarding and stimulating, and opened my eyes actually to just how other organisations are run, and what the church can learn from that. So I think I would say that was probably the best example I could give of my own experience.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because actually you went into the review with a question, and it didn't matter that you didn't have a fully formed solution, because it feels as though that out of the question emerged all sorts of amazing things.
Yeah, yes. And I think because the bishop himself was very engaged in the secular world, and sits on all kinds of committees and boards and things, he understood, I think, what I was wanting. And I think because he knew my particular interests in social justice issues as well, he was able to point me in the right direction. So it was very good.
Fabulous.
Sorry.
That's great. And
Yeah.
of course, your reviewer might not know you that well, but they can help you formulate the question more specifically, can't they?
Yes, I think that's the idea, and I think if people come to an MDR open to conversation and open to exploring, I think you can both enter the room not really knowing what you're going to end up with, And that's part of the excitement, really, because you're journeying together, and creative things can happen then.
Amazing. So what will be seen in the diocese in a year or 5 years that will enable people to know that the MDR is really serving ministers, parishes, communities, and the kingdom?
Well, I would hope that it'll be a way of helping clergy to prioritise their ministries. So I think it's very easy for parish clergy particularly to think that they have to do everything. There's so much need out there and so many ways in which we can serve the community. Sometimes we run around not really very focused, and I would hope that an MDR will help clergy to focus better on where to put their time and energies, so that rather than trying to do little bits of everything, they actually focus more effectively perhaps on a few things. I would hope to see happier clergy, clergy living lives that are better balanced, and clergy who give themselves time not just to rest and go on retreat, but to study and to read, because I think that's really important in terms of resourcing ourselves, and that in doing that, it would ripple out into the life of the church, and they themselves would be modelling something important about Christian ministry and Christian life. So I would hope that happens fairly quickly in the first year or so. As we go forward, we're, like all the Welsh dioceses, structuring ourselves into ministry areas, so groups of parishes that are served by teams of lay and ordained ministers. And I think what I'm hoping in those 5 years is to start doing ministerial reviews for the team as well as for the individual ministers, so that we actually give the team a chance to reflect on how it's working, how they might better and more effectively use the resources that they have, and how they might better prioritise their work together to serve the churches and the communities in which they're set. So that's the hope.
Wow, so individual and corporate transformation.
Yes, and I guess we'll need help with that, because I think working with teams is very different to working with individuals. So we may well be calling on your skills and expertise to come and help us with that. But I do think it's really important. We have spent time and money on the ministry area leaders, which is great, because obviously leaders need coaching and training. But I think there's something really rich about the team together, being on a journey and working together on how they might best work and be most effective.
Thank you. And if I can't stand the idea of MDR and I'm a minister, what would you say to me?
Well, I would say this is a real opportunity to take stock, to prayerfully reflect on your own. I mean, I have to say that when I've done MDRs, some of the really rich times have been just on my own, sitting down with the piece of paper and taking time to look back and to reflect myself. So I think that in itself is helpful. But I think then also having an opportunity to share those thoughts and those reflections with somebody else, to help best focus the work, to try and discern where God might be leading them in their own ministries, their own calling. And I think perhaps particularly to discern what you might need to put down as well as take up, because we're very good at taking up new things. We're not so good at putting things down. So I would hope people would see it as a real opportunity to take time and reflect, and therefore to move forward prayerfully, having discerned where God is in their lives and ministries.
And I love the thing that you're saying, and the discernment might be to do less.
Well, yes. I mean, it is true, isn't it? And I think particularly, in the last year, with all that the pandemic has meant, people have taken on so much more in an attempt to meet the needs that are clearly there, and all the online stuff and the videoing, and that will probably continue, but we can't do everything. And if we try, then we either burn out or we do nothing very effectively. So I would say putting things down is as important as taking things on.
Thank you. So is there anything else that you'd like to say to your reviewers?
Be not afraid.
Yeah.
This isn't about Big Brother checking up on you. I think that's probably what people fear, that this is an opportunity for the bishop to make sure that you're pulling your weight and behaving yourself. It's not like that at all. It really is about encouraging people in their ministries and helping them to be the best they can be.
What a gift. Thank you very much.